It is 2,121 years since Jesus Christ was crucified, and it is 71 years since he returned to Earth from his interplanetary joyride with a bisexual cyborg, only to find his home planet very different, and himself somewhat of a household name. He instantly used this newfound celebrity to update many of his old teachings about life, the universe, and how to cater for large groups on a small budget. It is 68 years since he released his best-selling memoir, The Life and Wisdom of a Complex Messiah. The critics crucified him. Not literally, but literally. The public became disinterested in anything he had to say. Even his self-produced biblical sci-fi biopic, A Complex Messiah, in which he starred as himself and co-directed with J.J. Abrams' Hologram, was a box office flop. The world's leading film reviewing robot, the Commodotron, called it a 4-hour onslaught of pure narcissism, self-promoted as a surreal, existential masterpiece. Most definitely not the greatest story ever told. Many audiences complained about the extreme sex and violence, or lack thereof, particularly the religious ones. His career plummeted. He ended up going on numerous reality TV shows to try and maintain his ever-evaporating public profile. It is 59 years since he declared bankruptcy, and 50 years since his apparently accidental death. The morning after which, Don Nova was born. This is purely coincidence, but Don, being a narcissist, took it to mean he was special in some way, which he wasn't. He had lived a life lived by many others before him. He'd spent decades trying to make it in the entertainment industry as a singer. He'd failed, and he'd wound up playing at holiday camps and aboard cruise ships. Only these ones were in space. By the time Don was born and Jesus had snuffed the lid, humanity had pretty much used up all of Earth's resources in space, and had to set about colonising the cosmos. It took only a matter of a few decades for humanity to discover a whole host of new planets to fuck up, and even less time for the big corporations to buy them and whack their logos around their rings. They were terraformed, colonies were set up, tourism thrived. Soon, almost anyone could afford to holiday amongst the stars, not just the uber-rich on their private planets. And thus, the cosmic equivalent of Butlins was born.
Come to the glamorous surroundings of the Grand Ballroom and have yourself a drink or two. Dancing partners are available for the usual application of credits, and food and snacks are in the usual vending machine area. If you want to have a vision of the stars outside, you can pay for a private booth, in which you can indulge in your other peccadillos. Interstellar Artois, gonna get you going far, gonna reach the stars. Interstellar Artois.
Hi there, sir. Yeah, don't know if how'd you do.
Will we see you at the bar, Interstellar Artois?
Yeah, maybe. I might be around later.
Interstellar Artois.
I think it's legal in this part of the galaxy. Darling,
Interstellar Artois.
this your first time aboard the bog now? Be more than happy to give you a tour. Yeah. Take down my room number.
Interstellar Artois. Can I get you a drink, sir?
Yeah, please, I have a Manhattan project.
Or is there something else you would prefer?
Why don't you go mine? Well, more than expecting that. So, could I have both?
Interstellar Artois. Interstellar Artois.
That is the spot, right?
Interstellar Artois.
Each crew member aboard the ship was assigned their own personal AI computer, developed from the technology that allowed people to wirelessly shop, play music and TV in their homes as the device recorded their most intimate moments. Each AI had an extremely complex, almost human-like personality and consciousness. As such, they were always breaking down. It took no real effort to cause them to short-circuit from an existential crisis. This problem was solved with later models. Don Nova did not have a later model. Instead, he had Jax, a computer best described as incompetent, forgetful, and often antagonistic. Also, it is worth mentioning that Jax was newly transgender. Now, this was not a choice on their part, but instead was an accident caused by Don one drunken night. He was attempting to switch Jax's voice from the default male setting to the female one, but the lifelike nature of the AI mind caused it to process the change like a human mind would. And ever since, Jax has struggled with their new identity and resented Don for forcing such a dramatic change upon them without their consent. It was for this reason that Jax did not make too much of an effort in waking Don when the transmission arrived. If Jax had done, perhaps none of this would have happened, and the Earth wouldn't have been destroyed. Don Nova was propped at the bar of the Grand Ballroom, nursing a hangover. He'd had a few too many at the Calypso cocktail party the night prior. It'd been a holodeck hula in memoriam of Drummond, a low-level plumber who died on the job. He'd been trying to fix a faulty loo on K-Deck, and ended up being ejected into the starry black abyss via a shit-stained U-bend. In truth, Don had always hated Drummond, and the way he looked down on him. Yes, for even a bloke who spends the majority of his time elbow-deep in the shit of space chaps, still has a higher social standing than the entertainment staff upon the SS Bognor. But such is the plight of a cosmic lounge lizard, he thought, and ordered himself another drink. Note, it was not, nor has it ever been, official company policy to refer to their guests as chaps, cosmic holidaymakers and visitors, due to the negative connotations it has, being a derogatory term for the working classes in the early 21st century. Unofficially, however, the staff, particularly those in power, have always referred to the guests as chaps, mainly as they're a bunch of stuck-up, bourgeois wankers who only got their job because their daddy's mate is an admiral in the Space Force. Don stared absently at the chrome-plated chest of the androgynous android handing him his drink. The service industry robot proved a fine reflective surface for him to gaze at his aged face, which was evidence enough that life aboard the SS Bognor had taken its toll. All his features were still pretty well defined. The chiselled jaw wasn't lost in a bloated mush, and the aquiline nose was still intact, if somewhat crooked from numerous right hooks. His hairline was receding, but he'd yet to get an island, and his hair was still rather thick and black, thanks a great deal to hyperdrive hair dye and other black market cosmic cosmetics. But despite this, his piercing grey eyes had a hollow emptiness within them, and hollow dark rings around them. Rings as mysterious and magnificent as those of Saturn, he mused to himself, before dropping 5.5 credits into the slot in the Barbot's boat race, as he took an acidic sip of his Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was the code name given to the research and development which led to the atomic bomb. It is also the codename given to a particularly potent psychotropic cocktail invented by Don Nova. The ingredients include all those found in a normal Manhattan cocktail, plus a number of other ones from the outer stretches of the known universe. These include the egg yolk of a squirrel from the moon Nutellius 6, a plant seed known as Hawaiian baby woodrose or elephant creeper, and half a can of Tizer. It was this Hawaiian baby woodrose which gave it its hallucinogenic kick, as well as giving Don some fucking weird dreams. By and large, they involved a group of Russian space dogs. As a small boy, he was told about the canines the Soviets had sent out into space, some of which died amongst the stars. The confusion of these poor creatures horrified the prepubescent Don, unable to comprehend what had happened to them or do anything about it. From then on, he dreamt of them, or rather, their ghosts. Usually, they'd float up to him, howling for help, but he was powerless. He didn't dream of them every night, only when he felt particularly uneasy, or if he had a few too many Manhattan projects. Or, strangely enough, just before something fucking awful was about to happen to him, like some kind of omen. Don wasn't an outwardly superstitious man, but it'd be fair to say he'd often been a patient on the paranoid ward. There were those, or so he believed at least, that thought him to be a fucking lunatic. Now this was true, only in the sense that a large part of his mental problems were caused by the moon, or rather, his proximity to it. No matter how normalised space travel had become for his species, Don knew it was inherently abnormal. In his heart of hearts, he believed humans were only ever supposed to gaze up at the cosmos, not turn it into a fucking temple to commercialism and greed, the new frontier for free market capitalism. Interestingly, this is one of several thousand reasons why so few aliens had made contact with the various species on the planet Earth, aside from badgers, and why humanity has not been welcomed into the Intergalactic Federation or knows of its existence, unlike badgers who have known for some centuries. We are considered some of the worst neighbours in the known universe, and so it had been decided by those behind the Federation's facade of respectability, those who really run the show, that it was curtains for Earth. And unbeknownst to Don Nova, he was to become a vital component in its closing number. Some would say, its lead singer. Time, gentlemen, please, the robotic bartender announced, and the dancers dispersed like roaches under a spotlight, scurrying back to their suites. But when our worlds collided, I remember it all with total recall. You glided with anti-gravitational grace across the ballroom's fluorescent floor, silently running on a blade, pulling me into your orbit, eyes so serene and soylent green. You beautiful creature from a sci-fi future. Do a dirty little dance, take a flirty little chance. Let's have a close encounter. Outlandish thoughts make my heart race. You send shivers and tremors through my inner space with your lovely face. You future. Do a dirty little dance, take a flirty little chance on me. Don was a firm believer that most people, or to be truthful, most men have the one that got away. This is also true of some serial killers, but that's a whole other discussion. This is the person that still haunts their hearts late at night. For Don, it was Kelly. He had truly loved her and had foolishly thought he'd found the person he'd spend the rest of his life with. Kelly had been a rocket scientist back on Earth. She was extremely intelligent, far smarter than Don, and he knew it. He'd be a liar if he said this didn't bother him. It had nothing to do with her gender and had everything to do with his ego. Don liked to feel like he was the smartest person in the room. With Kelly, he knew objectively that he wasn't. And he resented her for it. Usually at dinner parties, when she'd be engaged in an extremely complex discussion about the nature of reality with some suave brain surgeon, and he'd be left to ponder the weather with a good doctor's golf widow. None of this was really Kelly's fault. It was all on Don, and deep down, he knew it. He just didn't want to admit it to himself. Eventually, Kelly left him and the filthy blue and green rock she'd met him on for a job aboard a mining vessel. Its final destination was a far-off planet in the outer reaches of the galaxy, where a colony would be set up. Don begged her to stay with him, and even suggested they maintain a long-distance relationship. Kelly shot down all his pleas like grass. On the day she departed Earth, Don decided he'd had enough of it too, and got a job aboard the SS Bogner. That had been nearly 20 years ago, and he still thought of Kelly every day. He once asked Jax to create a holographic replica of Kelly, pieced together from Don's photos, videos, and uploaded memories. However, Jax made a mistake. Instead of creating a hologram of Dr. Kelly Everett, the love of Don's life, Jax created a hologram of 1970s DJ, light entertainer, and TV comedian Kenny Everett. For 3 days, Don was tormented by an onslaught of surreal characters and right-of-centre politics before Jax was able to, or decided to, shut down the hologram. Don never asked Jax to do it again.
Room service, I'm calling out to you. Room service, what's on the menu? I
heart. Room service, I need some help with this. I feel I'm losing my mind. Room service, I need some help with this. Don't turn me down tonight. My baggage is emotional, and I'm in dire need of a wake-up call. Room service, I need some help with this. I feel I'm losing my mind. Room service, I need some help with this. Don't turn me down tonight. Saturn has 82 moons. Of those 82 moons, 12 are lunar landfills. The remaining 70 are all owned by various human corporations. Together, they are a cosmic collection of holiday camps, concentration camps, amusement parks, bemusement parks, blood sports stadiums, shopping centres, casinos, brothels, bars and ghettos. It's a bit like an uncanny cocktail of Blade Runner, Benidorm and the Reaper Barn. Even though the corporations technically own the moons, it was the mobsters who kept them spinning. Crime was rife, as was corruption. Hence why the holidays there were so fucking cheap. Particularly in comparison to the more high-end resorts at the other end of the galaxy. The kind of resorts that wouldn't hire Dom. Not that he really gave a flying fuck. At least on the Bogner, he was left mainly to himself. If he worked at one of the swanky wanky resorts, he knew he'd lose his job within approximately 12 minutes or so for chinning some posh cunt. Whether he wanted to admit it or not, he still had a chip on his shoulder when it came to class. Don was a pro through and through, so going to work for some bourgeois resort would have felt like an act of class betrayal. No matter how much he hated the Bogner and the gormless bovine faces that stared back at him night after night after fucking night, he couldn't bring himself to leave. Yeah, he could just pack it all in and find a gig elsewhere, but what was the point? That would bring its own assortment of stresses that, frankly, Don couldn't be arsed with. Don thought, in all likelihood, he'd probably die upon the Bogner. Which was true. He would, in only a few days' time.
This is Disco 3000, where the rave never ends. Mima's #1 nightclub fam. It's your main man MC Orion. Burn you banger after banger after banger. Hold tight Don Nova. Hold tight TJ Newton. Hold tight Admiral. Hold tight The Rustler. Hold tight Alan Country Davidson. Zim Zimmer! This is a message for Zim Zimmer! Someone has found your keys, fam, and has left them in the cloakroom. Please collect them right away! Oh! Whoever's got those dirty money, please return it to him right away! We don't want to get the feds involved, fam. This is a very important message. Listen up, people! Would the real Slim Shady please stand up? I need the real Slim Shady to stand up, please. This is an urgent message for the real Slim Shady. Would the real Slim Shady please stand up and identify yourself to Kevin behind the bar? Your friend is ill, fam. His palms are sweaty, knees weak. His arms ain't exactly light either. I repeat, this is an urgent message for the real Slim Shady, not you other Slim Shadys.
Hello Houston, we have a problem. You're not oiled up and on top of me. You're more NASA than a naysayer. Take off your boots and feel the gravity of this situation we are both facing is one small step to ecstasy. So won't you take a stroll with me? Rocket, stick it in your socket. Come and ride it right down to the base. Rocket, stick it in your socket. Come and ride it right down to the base. Rocket, stick it in your socket. Come and ride it right down to the base. Prince said there's 23 positions in a one-night stand. Well, I'm the king, and I reckon there's at least 4 more to give me permission to land. Rocket, stick it in your socket. Come and ride it right down to the base. Rocket, stick it in your socket. Come and ride it right down to the base. Rocket, stick it in your socket. Come and ride it right down to the base. I tell ya, I'm feeling something I've never ever felt. You're not just another notch on my asteroid belt.
Welcome to Singles Night. Well, the drinks are half price, and everyone is looking for love. So, get your behinds up on the dance floor. Don't be a bitty no mate sitting in the corner. Get out there. Find some love.
Through the writhing mass of sweaty dancers, he first set eyes on her, shimmering under the neon lights in a cocktail dress and fuck-me pumps. A half-empty martini clasped between her bony fingers, a half-shaved head, and a cryptic scalp tattoo. She must have felt his eyes on her, 'cause hers caught his, and she smiled. She came up to him, an olive pinched between her teeth, skewered on a cocktail stick, like the heads of Tudor traitors. She asked him if he wanted a drink, and ordered them both a dirty Martian martini before he could reply. He liked that. Her name was Zartina. She only drank martinis, and she only fucked artists. Or so she said. Don told her he was a singer. What kind of music, she asked. Stuff like the Antarctic chimps? No, he said, more like Drimblewedge and the vegetation. She didn't know them, she had no desire to know them, and she told Don so. This was his kind of woman. After several hours discussing the music and films they both loved and loathed, they ditched their private booth in Bojangles and hurled a bionic tap-tap downtown. As Dino crooned a sentimental old ditty from the speakers implanted in the back of the rickshaw driver's cranium, Don thought how rare it was for him to have a beautiful woman in his arms. For once, it felt like everything might just be alright. How fucking wrong he was. She asked him where he was staying. He said he never plans that far ahead. Oh, so you like to live in the moment? That all depends on the moment, he said. They settled on a cheap shit room with an hourly rate. The kind of place businessmen bring belts to masturbate. It came with a bottle of red and a hot pink water bed and 50,000 holographic blue movies. Do you feel the sleaze of it all? It's oozing through the wall. Sweet 69 is oh so gross and groovy.
He lay on the bed with a tumbler and head. He couldn't get thoughts of it out of his head. In the ensuite shower she rubbed herself clean, soap in the best bod he'd ever seen. Though he hadn't seen it yet in all its glory, he was willing to bet it was wet and horny. The bulge in his pants made his thoughts quite clear, and he felt with a gasp that the moment was near. He loosened his tie and his belt and his laces, hoping to do better than past disgraces. He gulped at the wine and it went to his head, and so to his pencil, filling with lead. He began to sense what was coming. Anticipation, better than reality. Anticipation, what else better could there be? Better have patience. The light from the shower fell into the room, the door opened wide and she stood in the gloom. She only wore a towel and he could see what a wonderful evening this would be. He approached her as she came through the door, stepping out of his trousers, they fell to the floor. As they embraced, he blessed his luck and prepared to enjoy a magnificent fortune.
He came with a bottle of red and a hot pink water bed and 50,000 holographic blue movies. Do you feel the sleaze of it all? It's oozing through the wall. Sweet 69 is oh so gross and groovy. Do you feel the sleaze of it all? It's oozing through the wall. Sweet 69 is oh so gross and groovy. Don was curled up in bed, quivering between his sweat-soaked sheets. The pain in his unmentionables was excruciating. It felt like someone was flossing his tubes with wire wool. He was pretty sure of two things. One, that he was going to pass out from the pain. and 2, that he'd caught something from Zartina. Don had had his fair share of sexually transmitted infections, so much so that he considered penicillin one of his 5 a day. But this was something else. He'd never experienced pain like it, nor the contradictory erection that went along with it. He reckoned it was approximately 6 hours since he'd left the hotel room, 4 hours since he'd felt the first dull ache in his right nutsack, and 3 hours since he'd got a proper Vlad on and had to hobble back to his quarters. Don clambered out of his bed, his sheets stuck to his back like some sort of hero, and staggered into his loo. He tried pissing, but it was no use. After the initial jet of burning brown piss hit the ceiling, scorching his urethra on the way up, the rest just dribbled out like a broken shower head. He collapsed onto the toilet seat, his aching, throbbing member taunting him. He felt like he had an uber UTI, combined with the worst case of blue balls imaginable. He had to knock one out. It'd probably be painful, but it was the only thing he could do. He was right. It was beyond excruciating, like an anti-orgasm. A gradual build-up of agony, which culminated in Don's knees buckling beneath him as he anti-climaxed and passed what felt like a monumental kidney stone. It hit the rim of the sink with a metallic plink, bounced off of it and cracked Don's mirror before coming to rest between his feet. Don stared at it from his pile of limbs on the bathroom floor. His pain was gone, but his problems were only just beginning. Don noticed that the small metallic stone seemed to be coated in a green slime. He then realised that this was his semen. Before he had time to be completely horrified, the surface of the stone began to crack. A limb, most likely a leg, burst from the egg and twitched manically, followed by several more. Don scrambled away from the arachnid as it revealed its deformed, human-like face and let out a piercing scream. He then spun around and scuttled out of the bathroom and out of Don's quarters at breakneck speed. Don knew he should have worn a Johnny. Don had always said if he ever knowingly fathered a child, he would name it after the Lambeth district he'd grown up in. He saw no reason to change that plan now, even if his offspring was certainly not what he had in mind. It was still his baby, his little Vauxhall. Although, to be fair, by the time Don found his newborn spawn, Vauxhall was no longer small, and had in fact grown to roughly the size of a Jersey cow. Vauxhall had seemingly made a beeline for the control centre of the SS Bogner, leaving hundreds of shredded corpses and violently ill survivors in its wake. Security were right on its tail, firing all they had in vain to disastrous results. It was in the ensuing barrage of blood, guts and laser beams that Don Nova was fatally struck by a shot through the heart. He was dead before he hit the casino floor. It took Dr. Naylor and his team of surgeons just over 72 hours to bring Don back from the dead. During the surgery, Don was technically deceased, or rather, his body was anyway. His brain, on the other hand, was held in a kind of suspended animation, wired up and bobbing about in a glorified fish tank. He wasn't aware of what was happening to him or his body. The whole time, Don just dreamt. He dreamt of Zartina, and of Kelly, and of Vauxhall, and of all those doomed space dogs. Dr. Naylor replaced Don's disintegrated heart with a second-hand bionic one, taken by force from a retired repo man who happened to be holidaying aboard the Bognor. They then reattached his brain to his body, and with that, Don Nova was resurrected.
Ship's log, new entry. This is Dr. Naylor of the cruise ship SS Bognor. As of this recording, the crisis has only worsened. We have yet to discover how the creature got on board the vessel, nor do we know its current whereabouts. From what we have been able to piece together from the various eyewitness accounts and the surviving security footage, it appeared to be heading for the ship's control center. If this is the case and we do not find it and stop it before it reaches its destination, I fear we are all doomed. There is also the issue of the infected. We have studied these poor unfortunates over the last few days, and with each hour their condition worsens. We have made no new discoveries about the precise nature of the virus, aside from those listed in my previous log entry, but we do now have a better understanding of its symptoms. From what we have observed, the virus creates a rabies-like effect in those infected, and soon their most basic, animalistic, carnal desires become the driving force of their existence. In short, the person is eradicated from the body. Any sense of morality, ethics, or self disappears, and the lizard brain, so to speak, takes control. We believe it is in these acts that the infection is passed on. Other symptoms include, but are not limited to, fever, chills, headaches, nausea, emesis, epistaxis, diarrhea, deafness, blindness, involuntary ejaculation, bloody sputum, in fact bleeding from every possible orifice, cardiac arrest, coma, and possible spontaneous combustion. Suffice to say, the cleaners have been working overtime. It seems they've forgotten about their pathetic protests and the strike over the alleged murder of that Paloma. It's an utterly preposterous accusation, much like those thrown at my esteemed colleague Dr. Allen. Liars and bitches, all 387 of them, needlessly trying to ruin the reputation of a respected gynecologist. The man's a saint. I digress. As for our suspected patient zero, the so-called entertainer known as Donovan Nova has recovered from surgery and the necessary samples have been taken for further testing. He is heavily sedated and awaiting transit to the lower decks. It has been ordered by those who make such decisions that he be interrogated and then used in Project Dogstar. Personal note, I must remember to reschedule Cyber Polo with Tarquin. I doubt all this would have been cleared up by then. I also need to feed my Cyber Polo pony. He doesn't seem to be faring very well on a diet of peppermints.
Just a little prick now.
Come, Mr. Nova. You know you're used to a little prick.
Drifting through space, staring at my lonely face, trying to take my place in amongst the human race. Club Psychotropicana is free Free to enter, that is leaving's tricky. Club Psychotropicana's free. Free to enter, that is you cannot leave. Nothing's what it seems when you're trapped in that trance. My mind's tripping at the seams. No one hears my screams. When I began to feel the strain, pigeon feelings all around my brain. They said I should be strange. Sounded like starting all the strain again. Drifting through space, drifting through space, staring at my lonely face. Space is such a lonely place. In direct contravention of the manifold warning signs adhering to most walls, toilet cubicle doors, condom dispensers, averse sides of menus and all public and most private spaces aboard the SS Bognor, Don found himself on the wrong side of the engine room door. The engine room, in fact the entire engineering deck, was, is and always will be a prohibited area. Only the highest ranking engineers and officers were allowed on the deck. And even then, it was rumoured that only an extremely select few were granted access to, or even knew what was within, the engine room itself. The SS Bognor had secrets to keep. Or rather, the oxymoronic Russian hybrid that is a communist corporation, which owned the SS Bognor, had secrets to keep. Long-dead oligarchs had funneled their capital into research into long-distance space travel and the possible power sources of such. Unbeknownst to Don, by entering the engine room, he was about to discover how the monolithic cargo carrier of bovine holidaymakers was able to barrel its way through the dark recesses of space without any apparent need to refuel. To his mounting horror, Don came across tank after tank of alien life forms. Some similar to the mammalian sexpot he'd recently had a brief dalliance with, and whose charms had to some extent remained with him even now. However, the creatures in these vats were many and varied. They floated in a nutrient-rich amniotic fluid at odd angles, twisting and jackknifing in occasional spasms, tangling themselves in the labyrinthine wires and cables that intertwined their wretched forms. Those that had discernible eyes either had them firmly closed or exhibited vacant stares. They were, it seemed, in a semi-comatose state, awake just enough to know what they were experiencing, but not enough to do anything about it. The most they could do was cry out, creating an interspecies orchestra of agony. This was significantly and mercifully masked by the fluid in which they were suspended and the thick walls of the tanks that contained them. It had long been known that the brain transmits electrical energy. That is the case whether it be the brain of an amphibious shark swimming beneath a surfer in the multi-moon drenched oceans of the beach planet Kokomo, or a deranged bipedal scientist from Scunthorpe. What the awful chamber contained was a reservoir of that electrical energy, stimulated and magnified by the appalling hallucinatory nightmares induced in the captive creatures' minds by the psychotropic amniotic fluid. It fed them and tortured them in equal measure. Don could not be sure, but as he ran screaming from the chamber, he thought he caught sight of what looked like a human form, writhing in agonised strokes in the hellish pool. On the side of its tank was a sign: refill due 2121. Raced the hyperbuggy across the blood-splattered ballroom floor and skidded through the casino doors, narrowly avoiding a bank of slot machines as he did so. He whizzed around the cybernetic roulette wheel, followed by several overturned holographic blackjack tables, and out into the remnants of the lobby. He knew it had to be a matter of minutes, if that, before the last lifeboat detached itself from the Bognor. And he needed to be on the bastard feet, so help him God. He ripped back the throttle as the hyperbuggy flew through the food court, past the St. Ramsden's Friary, past the Mother Teresa Pizzeria, past the MLK Chicken Hut, gaining momentum all the while. In the blur on either side of his face, Don could make out glimpses of corpses and flashes of the infected. In the distance, he could hear the faint popping of blaster rifles and the muffled fuzz of grenade launchers. Before he knew it, he was fast approaching a lifeboat bay. Of the 15 previously docked pods, only one remained, number 30. Outside its door lay the trampled cadaver of a bingo caller. Unlucky for some, Don thought, as he hopped off the hyperbuggy and searched the dead man's suit for cigarettes and alcohol. The lifeboat drifted through the detritus of the SS Bognor for a total of 54 hours and 19 minutes before coming to rest on the cheap side of the moon. In that time, Don watched the demolition of his home planet through a porthole window. Like a boy on bonfire night, he watched the fireworks explode against the vast blackness. Only these fireworks weren't like the dodgy ones his uncle had got down East Street Market. These fireworks were nuclear warheads, circling around Mother Earth's face like bastard flies before crash landing with devastating results. Don did not know why the missiles had been launched. Neither he nor Jax knew that when his spawn had finally reached the control centre of the Bognor, as the creature had been genetically engineered to do, Vauxhall uploaded its own DNA sample into the ship's bioscanner, thereby producing a binary code which, when analysed, infected the entire control system with a lethal computer virus. A virus which quickly and effortlessly spread from the SS Bognor to every other satellite and ship the vessel had ever come in contact with, and therefore every satellite and ship they had ever come in contact with, and so on and so forth. By tea time in Hull, the national security of almost every country on the planet, apart from Belgium, was compromised, and all hell proceeded to break loose. No one knew what was happening. Everyone assumed someone else was attacking them. Fingers were pointed, buttons were pushed, total annihilation ensued. There was no way for Don to know the extremely long and complex chain of events he was a part of. For instance, he was oblivious to the fact that Zartina was a secret agent for the Federation, who, at the very moment the Bognor exploded, was being overlooked for a promotion in favour of a male colleague, despite all her hard work in ensuring the utter destruction of humanity. Unbeknownst to all those involved, this act of disrespect would eventually set her on a path of enlightenment, which would ultimately lead to her becoming a rebel fighting against the Federation, as well as leading to her newly promoted colleague being fed his own genitals for crimes against the universe. Nor was Don aware of the truth regarding the death of the man who's known as Drummond, how he'd actually been a member of a terrorist cell operating aboard the ship, gathering information about Project Dogstar, how members of the organisation were disguised as low-level workers, such as plumbers, vending machine technicians, dinner ladies and the like, to allow them to investigate whilst remaining undetected. Even Reg, the old bloke who took the coats at Club Nebula, was in on it. How Drummond did not meet his end on the job by being sucked out of his shitter, but instead was forced to watch as he was systematically and sadistically dissected upon a slab by a colleague of Dr. Naylor. The whole process took roughly 2.5 hours, by which time all that was left of the man was a barely conscious brain. This was then flushed down the loo. Don was ignorant to the kaleidoscopic web of intergalactic espionage that he was at the very centre of. He was far more concerned with himself. In particular, his need for a stiff fucking drink. As luck would have it, the lifeboat cruised over the site of the original Apollo 11 moon landing, known as Tranquility Base, past the desolate remains of the accompanying hotel and casino, and eventually crash-landed outside the biodome of the Blue Moon Lounge.
Don't you look cute in your cosmic zoot suit with your ray gun? Don't you look cute in your cosmic zoot suit with your ray gun? Your ray gun, will you turn it on yourself? Can you turn it on yourself? Don gazed at the smouldering remains of his home planet from the patio of the Blue Moon Lounge. He didn't know how much oxygen was left in the club's artificial atmosphere. It could be minutes, it could be centuries. Nor did he know how much booze there was left. He hoped there was enough to drink himself to death before the inevitable suffocation. He contemplated raising the ray gun to his temple and pulling the trigger, but it was low on battery. He could just end up with third-degree burns and a deformed face. It's not rocket surgery, don't you know now? He's a lonely human being. Loneliness is a raygun. Soon he will sadly cease to be. Don connected his wristwatch to the ray gun and transferred what little juice Jack had left into the battery of the firearm. The penultimate fault to pass for the computer's AI mind was the contents of that extremely important transmission, which Jax had only just that second remembered. Jax knew that if Don was made aware of this information, it could provide the answer to all of his current problems. The final fault to pass through the computer's AI mind was fucking. It doesn't take a brain scientist to see now. Loneliness is a ray gun. You'll find the trigger is to be the only one.
perfect flames. But damn it, Uranus still looks real hot. Actually, according to scientific claims, it's the coolest planet, believe it or not. Facts have never really been my strong point. Truth casts a neon light too bright and bold. I prefer the low shadows of the kleptons, where the smart artists are paid in fool's gold. Humanity is like a sexually transmitted disease, and the last lounge lizard alive ain't exactly Socrates. Oh no, he possesses no doctorates and no degrees. He's the imperfect patient for psychotropic analyses. Watching Mother Earth do an apocalyptic striptease with his pistol and his fist and his thumb around his knees, shooting over the act that was curtains for his species. This right here, this is the Ultrasleaze. The Ultrasleaze. The Ultrasleaze. The Ultrasleaze. This is the Ultrasleaze. The It's just getting older, watching it smolder. He is moon, lost on the moon. So, it's farewell to Don Nova. Maroon on the moon, with nothing but his hallucinations for company. But then again, who knows? Fortune's pendulum could swing in the other direction, and he could hitch a ride with some aliens, curious about the commotion in their neighbourhood. Although, in fairness, aliens have been scarce in this part of the galaxy for about half a century. And even then, they'd mostly visit Earth on intergalactic stag nights, impregnate a few humans, and then fuck off back home. Just like Don's chameleonic bastard of a father had done all those years ago.